This is our project, and there we have the app module. Actually, this is not the only module, and again, with module, I mean things with that ng module decorator. We got one other module in this app, and that would be the app routing module. Here, we also have a ng module. So we already do use two modules, and we use these modules to set certain things up and group certain things together. Now let's start with the app module. There we have a long list of declarations, for example. As I mentioned when we added things to that list, declarations is in the end an array of all the components, directives, and custom pipes you're using in your application. So all these things have to go into declarations, otherwise you can't use them in your templates or in your routes. We also have that imports array. The imports array here is important because that allows you to import other modules into this module. So the imports array here is important to split your app into multiple modules. Thus far, we created only one extra module, the app routing module, but we're using a couple of modules that ship with Angular, like the forms module, the reactive forms module, and so on. Now, if we were to look into such a module, like the forms module, we would find a module with @ng module as well. And in there, we would have a declarations array with all the form-related directives Angular supports. So things like automatically detecting the form element to create a form with the template-driven approach, or the required or the email directives. So all of that is basically included in the forms module. And so that you don't have to add all these features individually to your declarations array, we can simply import the forms module, which speeds this up. The providers array here then is another important key in our ng module. Here we define all the services we want to provide. However, I'll come back to services and modules because that's kind of special. It's not the case that you can only use a service in the module where you provide it, or at least that's not always the case. But I will come back to that. For now, it's important to know any service you plan on injecting needs to be provided, and typically you do this in the app module, or you do that by adding that provided in root key here into that object you pass to @injectable. This is an alternative to adding that service to your app module providers array, and this is actually the way I would use because it's faster, but you could also add a service here to providers, and it would also be available application-wide. Now, the bootstrap array is important for starting your app. It defines which component is available right in that index.html file. And typically, you only have one component there. You could have multiple components, which is why Bootstrap is also an array. You could define multiple components, but each component would then kind of be detached from the other components. You would be creating different root component trees in your application, and that is rarely what you want because it makes working between these components way harder. So therefore, you typically have one root component and you add that to the Bootstrap array. Well, and then we have the entry components here. That simply is important for components you create in code, as you learned in the section on dynamic components. This allows Angular to be aware of this component when it needs to create it programmatically. Now, as I mentioned, we do have one other module right now, and that's the app routing module, which we also added to imports. The app routing module is simply there to hold our route configuration. We could absolutely add this into our app module. We only outsourced it because that's quite a lot of code and it keeps our app module a bit leaner. And that is already one reason for why you might want to split your application into multiple modules. It can make your existing modules leaner and more focused and easier to edit and to maintain. Now, the app routing module simply imports the router module Angular offers us and uses a special method offered by that module, which then takes our route configuration to configure the Angular router with our route config, and then something important happens. We export that router module here from the app routing module. We need to do that because every module, and now that is something you have to memorize, every module works on its own in Angular. They don't communicate with each other. If you declare a component in a certain module, like app module, if we declare recipes component here, then we can only use it in here, nowhere else. We can only use it in here. So we can use the selector in our other components we declared here, but if we would have another module with other components, then we could not use selectors of components defined here in components of that other module. And we'll see this in action very soon. And therefore, here we have to export the router module with our route configuration so that it really is not just available in this module, which would not be helpful at all, but that it is available in the app module where we now import app routing module. And when we import another module, we import everything that module exports, which in this case is our configured router module. And this is how the configured router module ends up in the app module and is available there. So that is generally what we're already doing and what we're already using in our application. We're using these modules and everything works. Now, for smaller applications, you can absolutely leave it that way. Nothing wrong with that. This app module also is not too big. It's certainly manageable. But the bigger your application grows, you might want to split your code to have leaner modules that are easier to manage, easier to understand, and also, as you will learn later, to enhance performance. Not automatically by splitting components, but splitting components will be an important prerequisite to then also enhance performance.